In this lesson, we're going to talk about what those specific lifecycle stages are and how to define the different goals at each stage so that you, as a practitioner, know how to speak to users at these different stages. So first, let's look at the 4 stages of the user lifecycle. The first one is potential users. These are users that have downloaded your app. They may have started looking around. They may have even they may have even tried the value proposition for the first time, but they are not yet subscribed users. And our goal here is to move them into that subscribed and active bucket. Active users are, on the other hand, are users that are already paying users of the product, and they're getting value out of the product, and they're using it regularly, and they've built a habit. Drifting is when users may have been active in the past, and they might have even formed strong habits in the past, but their usage behavior, from what we can see in the data, has started to change, and they're no longer using the product as much as they used to. And the purpose for this stage is to guide these users back to the product to reinforce habits before they churn. And churned are users that are either they've cancelled their subscription, they're no longer on the premium version, or they're inactive, and it's very likely that they will churn at the next billing cycle. Now, let's look at the key jobs at each stage. So for potential users, what we want to do is onboard users effectively, which means giving them the right education and the right guidance to get set up and started with the product. Then from there, we want to guide them to what we call the aha moment. This is the moment where they experience value and they understand what the product is for and why they should keep using it. Then from there, what we want to do is we want to ensure that users keep coming back and building a habit around a product. So for example, with a meditation app, we don't just want to make sure that users do the first meditation and then leave them forever. We want to make sure that they keep coming back and they build a daily habit or even a weekly habit, if that makes more sense. Then what we want to do as well at this stage is we want to make sure that the paywall and the conversion moment is actually visible. Now, a lot of teams get this wrong. I've worked with teams where paywalls have been buried in the settings, they've been buried deep into the product. We want to make sure when we're at the free user stage and then the onboarding and activation stage that we prime users that this is a premium product and that there is a paid version of that product. Then we move to the active stage. This is, just as a reminder, this is paying users that are already getting value. So the key goals here are to re-onboard to the premium experience. Again, this is something that a lot of teams miss. We want to make sure that we don't just assume that because somebody is now a paid user, that they understand how to get the most out of the paid experience. And that's where it can help to sort of give extra guidance, make sure they know where the premium features are, and they know how to get set up again on this new premium tier. Again, similar to potential, we want to help the user build habits. So we want to get them activated onto that premium feature to understand the premium value and use it at least for the first time. And then from there, we want to build habits again, so that they keep coming back and using it over and over. And another thing that we can think about at the active stage is how can we actually expand the value for this user, and how can we get users that are already active and paying onto higher price tiers? And I'll go into that in more detail later on. Then drifting users. So first of all, what we want to do is we want to diagnose the problem. There could be many reasons why a user might be using a product less than they were before. So first we diagnose. Then what we want to do is similar to the active and potential segments, we want to reintroduce the product in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming, that feels relevant for the users and encourages habit reinforcement. And then for the churned user segment, we want to identify systemic churn issues, and we want to implement win-back strategies that feel natural and relevant in the user lifecycle. So what to do first is you want to map your strategy against each stage of the lifecycle. So as mentioned before, the trap that a lot of teams fall into is that they blast discounts to happy subscribers, or they ask low intent users to buy too early. And these messages can feel really irrelevant and they can feel out of context for the user and eventually fall flat. So what we want to do instead is identify which stage the users are at, target that specific stage of the life cycle and the goal for that stage, and then build the message that moves users forward. So now let's do our first practical exercise together. We're going to work on an exercise outlining where these stages exist in your app or product and map some messages that you would think about sending at each stage.
Hello everybody and welcome to the first practical exercise. The goal of this exercise is to help you map messages that you're either currently sending or thinking of sending to users to the lifecycle stage, and then to notice who you're actually talking to with those messages by segmentation, and to understand if there are any gaps. Maybe there's some of the stages where you're not messaging users at all and you think, okay, I need to actually work on that stage. Or maybe you realize through this exercise that some of the messages that you are sending are also being shown to other segments than what you intend. And you might realize that there's a bit of irrelevance there, and that can help you clean up the messaging strategy overall. So let's get started. Moving to the second tab titled Lifecycle Message Awareness, you will find at the top a table that I have created for you with 4 columns. Just make it big for everybody. Okay, so let's go through the 4 columns and then I'll walk you through some examples that I have created earlier. So for the life cycle stage column, this one's obvious. We've mapped here the different stages of the life cycle that we have already talked about. In column B, I want you to add either a message that you currently send or a message that you're thinking about sending or would send. In column C, I want you to think about which stage this message is really meant for, right? So if you're sending something to new users or potential users that are not yet paid, does this message belong in this bucket? And if not, which bucket should it actually belong in? And then in the last column, are there other stages that are likely seeing this message too? So think about your targeting and segmentation. If you're sending a message to a potential user, so a free user that's showing interest in premium, are there other stages by segmentation that might be receiving that too? For example, churned or drifting users. And I'll walk you through what I mean by that in just a second. So at the bottom, I've prepared some examples for you to look at as well. And for this example, we're going to pretend that I am leading a lifecycle team at a meditation app. So let's run through some of the messages that we send at the meditation app. The first one is in the potential free users showing interest bucket. It says, start your 7-day free trial to unlock all meditations, sleep stories, and anxiety programs. So which stage is this message really meant for? Well, it is meant for potential users that have sampled content and hit a limit. And that's the key. Active subscribers might still see it, and it might feel a bit generic if they haven't yet, sampled content or experienced the real value of the product. And based on the segmentation here, I've realized that drifting users might also get it, despite already paying or having paid before. So we want to make sure that drifting users, active users, and churned users are excluded from this messaging because it's not relevant to them, right? Then in the active user column, we have new sleep stories for anxious nights. Try one tonight. So who's that message for? Well, it is meant for active subscribers, so it is in the right place. And it's meant for users that have already got access to the premium product, but they might just need a bit of value reinforcement. But then when I think about the segmentation, I realize that actually drifting users might see it too, but without enough context to re-engage. So if somebody's not used the app for a while, they downloaded it for meditation and they've drifted because for whatever reason, maybe they're bored with the product, or maybe they just decided it's not for them, then sending a message about anxious nights and sleep stories might be really out of context for them. Then if you go to drifting, the message that we're sending is, your streak is about to reset. Want to continue where you left off. And this does feel relevant for drifting users because maybe they were on a streak before, they were using the product regularly, and maybe they had previously formed a habit. But what you want to make sure with your segmentation is that active users that are, still on a streak are not getting this message because we don't want to create an unnecessary sense of urgency. And as we'll also talk about later in the course, if users are active and engaged, it's okay to stop messaging them at that point. We want to leave them alone to get on with things. Messaging is for when we need to give people an additional nudge. So then let's look at the last one. So for churned users, the message we have is come back and try what's new, guided anxiety programs and better sleep tools. So yeah, sure, that makes sense. If somebody's churned, maybe they wanted more from the product, and it makes sense to send a message to update them on, product improvements, new features, this type of thing. But we need to be careful again with the segmentation, because if potential users saw this and they haven't even really got their heads around the basics yet, so maybe they haven't tried their first meditation, they're still figuring out how this product works, then they might feel a bit confused or even overwhelmed that we're already sending messaging about, new things that are in the pipeline or new features that have been released. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to overwhelm new users. So again, we would want to make sure that those users were excluded from the segmentation here. Now, scroll back to the top, take a look at the table and fill it in for your particular app or product. And once you've done that, there's a reflection tab, the third tab in the spreadsheet. And these are just some questions for you to answer to help you think about your own strategy, to understand where the gaps are, where you might be under messaging people versus over messaging people, and to understand as well, like what, if are there any messages that you really think, do you know what, this message doesn't actually fit in any of these buckets, and therefore it might not actually be a necessary message to send to users. So have a think about that too. And we'll see you back on the course when you're finished.